In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the selection tool. Now, we already went over it a little bit previously in the course, but we're really going to go into depth and explore all of the things you can do with it. So first, so we have something to work with, I'm just going to lay down a quick line here, and we'll fill in part of it with some color, or at least some value here, with some white. Okay, just so we have a shape, something to work with. There we go. Okay, so selection tool up here, and as well as the lasso tool is what this lecture is going to focus on, is going to be one of our most useful tools, especially when we're sketching and coming up with a rough underdrawing. So I have my lasso tool selected, and right now it's set on freehand, which means I can come along here and select whatever part I want just by using my stylus, and then I can move it around. Okay. Now right now it's set to magnetic, which you can see down here at the bottom, but if I choose freeform, it's going to allow me to move this around however I want. And this is going to be really useful when you're drawing if you want to adjust the proportions of something really quickly or move something around, okay? So let's say I want to move this around and put it something like that, but I want this bottom part to be a little bit smaller. I can just go ahead and select that, shrink it down to whatever size I want, and then place it back down, okay? Now let's say this big circle here, want it to be a little bit more of an oval shape, right? I can lasso that, select it, and then using these handles, which are the little dots on the square here, right now I'm hitting the bottom middle one, I can adjust that and make it nice and small, okay? Now in Procreate, if you hold down, you'll be able to warp it independently like this, okay? Photoshop, this is going to be called free transform, and you'll find it in your menu options, okay? So that's going to be another really useful tool as well. Okay, now let's say that I want to select everything on this layer. I can come over here to my layer menu, tap on it and hit select. Or if you're in Photoshop, you can do select all. Okay, it's going to select everything, but maybe I want, so now that's selected, what I can do is if I make a new layer and I get a new color and I paint, it'll only paint inside the selection I've already made. It won't paint outside the lines. Okay. Then when I turn that off, I'll have two separate layers, but they're both inside the same outline. You can see here it's on its own separate layer. Okay. Now, let's say that maybe I want to select this layer, but I actually don't want that selection. I want everything on the outside. I want it to be reversed. Well, in Photoshop, you can just hit inverse selections, but in Procreate, at the very bottom, you see this icon. It looks like two corners about to touch each other. It's right down here. It doesn't do anything when I tap on it, so it's hard to tell, but it's next to the X and next to the straight dash. Okay. By hitting that, you'll inverse the selection. So now, instead of painting inside the shape, we'll only paint outside the shape, and it will still be on its own separate layer, and we can move it around independently. Okay. So that's how you use that aspect. Another thing you can do once you have an object or a shape selected, so let's say we want to use a lasso tool to just get this part right here. Okay, now I can come over, I can hit on this arrow. Oops, let's make sure we're on the right layer. Select this, and now we have these other icons down here once we hit the selection tool. Okay, there's this one that looks like a sideways box with an arrow pointing on it. If I tap that, it's just going to mirror my reflection. Okay, and same thing with the other one, but vertically, the one next to it. Okay, if you want to undo, just hit the X and it will revert it to its base state. Okay, if you hit the box with the curved arrow, it's going to rotate it. Okay, and then this one will increase it to fill the size of the page, right? It'll bring it all the way till it's as big as it can get. Okay, so that's how that works. And then these arrows here are just the undo and redo button if you want to hit those manually instead of using any sort of hotkeys. Okay, and then if we tap magnetic, all it does is make it so it snaps to either the center line or different snap points along here. Same when we scale it, it scales without rotating. Okay, it snaps everything, so that can be pretty useful. And then let's cover all the last few things in our selection tool. We did freehand, but now we can do automatic. So if we do automatic, what it's going to do is select everything that is within that color and value range. So everything that's touching it that's white is going to get selected, and anything else we do on top of that. So now if I slide my slider, it's going to adjust the threshold. Now what the threshold means is how far of a range can pixels be from the original source pixel that you selected before it doesn't meet the selection, if that makes sense. So if I have a really low threshold, then it's going to make it so that, or if I have a high threshold, it's going to make it so that everything that I selected, it'll probably cover everything on the whole canvas. If it has a low threshold, it's only going to be pixels that are very, very close to the original pixel I selected. Okay, so if you do that, let's say we select this one, and then we go to our selection tool, it's going to select everything that was in that automatic selection. Now in Photoshop, this tool is a lot more useful because it's a lot more accurate. It takes a lot of power to be able to use, so Procreate doesn't handle it super well. Like you could see when I selected, it didn't get all of these extra pixels that kind of bleed out to the gray behind, so that when you move it, you leave like this halo behind. So I wouldn't recommend using it too much unless you have really crisp edges on whatever shape you're trying to select. But besides that, it works okay. If we come over here, we'll make another freehand selection just so you could see. Oops. So we're making a freehand selection. You can see that while I'm going, if I push this plus sign, it'll automatically close the shape. Okay, so right now I haven't closed it yet. In order to close that, I have to come up here and tap this dot, and it'll close the shape. But if I want to, anywhere in this point, down at the bottom, you see the plus sign, I can hit that, and it'll automatically close the shape. Or if I hit the minus sign, it'll close the shape, but it will inverse the selection. Okay, so close the shape and use that as a selection, or close the shape and inverse. That's what those do. X and the arrows are the same as the last one. They're undo, redo, and cancel. And then this icon, let's go ahead and make a shape again. This icon is going to make a new layer based just off of that selection. Okay, so you can see here, if I make this and hit that button, it's going to take that selection and turn it into its own new layer without taking away from the layer beneath. So we did it twice here. If I delete one and turn this on and off, you could see it's just that part, but it doesn't take away from the original layer. Okay, so that's everything you need to know about the selection tool and the lasso tool. They're going to be really useful and helpful for you. It's one of the main tools I use, especially when I'm sketching. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see you guys in the next one.